Thanks, Jeremy. So I thought I'd start, as Jeremy and Alex have both alluded to, it really depends on the understanding the context in which you're going to use a virtual agent. So to give you some background, I thought I'd talk briefly, very briefly, about Fujitsu and what we actually do, because what we aren't necessarily doing at the moment in my part of the business is B2C. We are very focused on B2B, business to business, and we're very focused on delivering digital transformation services and IT outsourcing. Fujitsu is a great big, and I tell you this primarily because Fujitsu is a great big corporation. So if I go back to Australia and tell people I work for Fujitsu, they think I'm in air conditioning. Whereas over here, we do a range of things from network devices right through to, as I say, IT outsourcing. So really what we're focusing on today is that IT outsourcing in our digital workplace services area for IT service desk. So if you skip through to the next slide. So we have an offering, and we'll talk about it in a minute, around we call Social Command Center. And what that offering is trying to address is a number of challenges that we understand exist within the market, particularly with our customers. So all of these challenges you probably heard before, so they're probably going to come as news to you. But what we're basically breaking it down into is two areas. One is the challenges that we understand the CXO, CIOs are having, and they are predominantly around how to make IT more of a business partner for their business. How do I improve productivity of my employees? We've equally got challenges around the changing nature of our workforce. So what we always hear are the same old things. People are becoming mobile. I can attest to this because I'm currently looking at the beach in Cornwall. So people are becoming more mobile and are wanting to access support and knowledge systems from a variety of places. Equally, businesses are having a great deal more trouble attracting the right staff. And part of that is staff are becoming more, employees are becoming more choosy about where they want to work. They want to work somewhere cool, somewhere that's actually embracing new technology that's not going to mean they're going to be frustrated with their job. So equally, that is also playing into the decision making of a CIO when they're starting to look at what does IT need to do to better support my business. Obviously, there's the inevitable reduce costs, and so how do I deliver IT but equally take cost out of the business? And that plays back to productivity. How do I get my employees focused on the job they're actually paid to do, and less time worrying about where to get access to knowledge, where to get support for IT, etc., etc. The other point, which I'll play into the next slide, is we talk about in our business something called the watermelon effect. Now, in IT outsourcing, what you'll quite often do is go in and you'll sign up a set of service levels that the CIO will agree to, and we will too. So we'll say, we'll deliver you this service, and these will be the key performance indicators under which I will deliver that service. Now that's great, and quite often we can prove that we're going to meet those KPIs, but in the background, what we quite often see is that the users are not happy, and we talk about it being green on the outside, the service levels are all met, and red on the inside, because actually people don't like the user experience that they're getting. So this is another challenge that we're trying to address as part of our offering and the solution that underpins that offering. So on this next slide, really comes back then to the user. Sorry, you can skip back one. It comes back to the user and the and the challenges we perceive, or the demands we perceive that the users are now expecting. And what we're talking about here is really the gulf that we're now seeing between what we as consumers expect from the market. And we talked briefly about Google and Amazon was a typical example, what you expect from that service when you interact with Amazon, versus what sort of service you get when you're at work. So there's this gulf between the consumer market and what we get in the enterprise. Equally, I've sort of said we have far more demand from an end user about choice, about how they're going to work, how they're going to interact. Typically, people want to use multiple devices now. They don't necessarily want to be on the same old corporately supplied device. They may want to be working on their tablet or their phone, etc. So they want choice in the way they're interacting. And as I said before, I'm looking at the beach in Cornwall. I want to be able to do this anywhere. I don't actually need to be plugged into my office. Why would I? So on the next slide, we just briefly, and I'll get back to the exam question around virtual agents. That is a key part of the underpinning solution of what we call social command center. But what we're trying to do is a shift from what we call traditional service desks, which were very much focused on telephones and portals, which, self-service is not a new thing, as Alex has been saying. A lot of these things aren't new, but we're trying to enrich that whole experience as part of a broader service desk service that we can deliver customers. And as I say, AI and virtual agents become a key part of that overall solution, but we don't lose a lot of the other reliance we've had on voice, etc. in the past. We keep that, and because it becomes part of the choice that the user then has. So if I skip through to the next slide, we actually get back to the exam question on virtual agents. So virtual agent it's been an interesting journey, and probably many people have said before me, it really is an interesting time to be living, because actually some of this technology is maturing at such a rate now that we can be doing so much more for it, and really start having conversations very quickly about some of the things Alex was talking about, increasing the depth of these technologies, so that they're more than just an FAQ system. They start understanding context about who you are, the level of skill you might have in my world, obviously the level of skill you might have about an IT issue. Therefore, I might talk to you in a certain way. So, to use an example of that, I'm currently deploying, a virtual agent to two different companies. One's a typical enterprise, the other one's in education, and the virtual agent will be accessed in the education sector by children. So the way I can configure that virtual agent to interact with a child would be different than the way I would configure it to interact with an adult in an enterprise market. So it starts to open up different opportunities for how we engage with and ensure a good user experience, no matter what the population is I'm trying to serve. As I said, it needs to be, in my experience, more than just an FAQ system. And this is very much the trap that we all fall into, or at least I've seen people fall into. So, it's the easiest thing to do. People have, and organizations have invested huge amounts of time and money building up knowledge repositories. And actually what we find is that we go into an organization and you'll have some knowledge on the portal, and you'll have some knowledge, in some other knowledge base. You have knowledge sources all over the place. Part of the challenge is, how do we bring all that together? How do we surface that knowledge and give people access to it? So, but it needs to be more than an FAQ system. But part of that's good. Part of it I can surface in a virtual agent. But equally, I want the virtual agent to do things for me. So if I'm one of the most frustrating things for me has been, something as simple as booking travel. Because I have to book my accommodation, I've got to book my flight, and et cetera, and actually, why can't the virtual agent do that for me? A few key questions from me about what is it I'm trying to do. And the virtual agent can go and integrate with those systems and just go and book it for me, give me the answer. Something as simple as book me a meeting room, who's attending, what's the size of the meeting room, what facilities do I need in that meeting room? Do I need a projector, et cetera? It can find me that meeting room and just give me the answer. It can even integrate with I know Microsoft has done this before, but I'll pinch it. It can integrate with your Exchange server and actually book the meeting invite for you and all your participants, because now you've got a meeting room booked. So there's a lot more that we can be doing with virtual agents than just FAQ. Otherwise, the risk is it becomes a glorified knowledge base or knowledge search. And we've had knowledge search forever, or for a long time. So there's not really anything differentiating about that. So I think, as Alex was saying, really understanding what processes have you got, what bugbears, where am I going to get the benefit, and then look at how do I codify that knowledge, but more than that, how do I actually get this virtual agent to go off and do things for me? Content is key, and I know there's been a bit said about is the virtual agent, is this AI technology going to come and steal people's jobs? And look, there will be a change in the way people, or the types of jobs people do. What we're experiencing is a far greater dependence on content managers. So there's a real change in the types of jobs people are doing. And it becomes so much more difficult when you start actually using your virtual agent to break down some of the traditional communication barriers that we've had around language. Typically, as many of you would know, most big organizations will pick a language that they're going to communicate in, and typically is English. But actually that means there's a huge population of people who are not native English speakers who are then having to speak in a language perhaps they're not as familiar with. Actually, now I can train my virtual agent and gear my content towards those people specifically, and they can then communicate within their preferred language, which is, in my opinion, a step forward, and certainly seems to be the feedback we're getting, a step forward, and we can reach people in a range of different languages. That then poses, again, a content problem. So how do I take global content, which might be things like Office 365 and Windows 10, etc., things that are common no matter what the company is I'm working in, add to that content that is specific to my company, and potentially content that is specific to my department or role, build all that up into and codify it into a virtual agent and make it usable. And then overlaying that into is all the languages that I need to support. And we've just deployed, or are deploying at the moment, one account with 19 different languages. It's been a real challenge for us, not the least of which is that people get very funny about grammar. So we had an instance where actually we've created quite a lot of content, happened to be in French, but it wasn't written in such a way that French readers were happy with reading. So actually we then had to go back through and adjust that and get a different person in who was a native French speaker, but because of dialect, because of maybe schooling level or whatever, maybe that person didn't write in such a way that was clear and obvious to everyone. So we've then had to come back in and adjust the content. So there's a lot of time and energy spent maintaining content. And then once you've got the content, then you've really got to start doing the clever things around AI. How do I integrate with this, or how do I interact with this content? How do I talk to this virtual agent in a language that is as natural as possible and have it understand? And that's where NLP, natural language processing, starts to become more and more complex. There's more and more time spent in the algorithms that drive natural language processing, or processing a language, but not just in English, but for many different languages. And that then there's a lot of time and energy spent there. I think on the next slide, yeah, so I've talked about a few of the challenges. One of the points I would get you to consider, particularly if you're in my industry, is adoption and utilization is key. As Alex was mentioning, if you don't keep the knowledge relevant, people stop using it, then you've just wasted your money. You've just got a cost that you're carrying. So making sure, and that poses a couple of challenges in the first instance. When you first deploy this virtual agent, you've got to make sure that you've got enough knowledge. I mean, you can't not switch it on until you've got all your knowledge codified, because you'd be forever building this knowledge base. But so how do you get enough knowledge? And that's on the previous slide where I talked about 12 weeks is roughly what we talk about. Say if we actively went into a deployment, we looked at all the knowledge sources we've got in the organization, or that we can get our hands on, looked at the really important ones and codified that knowledge, trained the virtual agent in that knowledge. Would that give us enough where the first time someone goes and interacts with this virtual agent, they go, oh, it knows nothing, I'm not going to use it anymore. So really, how do I communicate? How do I train it? And then how do I communicate the fact that this technology is going to continue to learn? Because that's equally important. As we communicate with our virtual agent and it fails to answer a question, that's really key information for us. We then take that, feed it back into our systems and try and generate the most appropriate response. So the next time the person asks or someone else asks that same question, I can get a response. Catering to your user bases, I'm jumping around on this slide, but is also key. And so what we have is situations where we might be supporting a retail customer, and virtual agents may be less. It's interesting. Some retail will sit there and tell you, actually, my staff don't have access to the internet, don't have access to a PC, wouldn't really use an online channel, and actually I don't really want them to self-serve because every second they're not on the shop floor selling, I'm not making any money. So you get that perspective. Equally, you get other customers who are much more willing to adopt those sort of things. You go into certain retailers at the moment and you'll find they use iPads, walk around the shop floor. So you're almost getting away from your traditional till. You go up to someone, they scan your item on the iPad, run your whole, you bill through the iPad and not actually engaging with the till anymore. So actually those people and those industries are embracing self-service and virtual agents in a much more ready fashion. The other thing I was going to mention around content and the focus on content management is that we can actually get smarter about how much we tear up or duplicate knowledge sources that are already in the environment already. As I say, organizations have potentially spent large sums of money maintaining their own knowledge sources, Microsoft, as an example, spends quite a bit of money going and publishing knowledge about its products in the market. Why? So the question becomes, why would I duplicate that? Why, unless there's a good reason, why would I have to go and recodify that into a virtual agent? So part of the challenge around content management is not only where do I get the knowledge, how do I make the user experience as useful as possible, actually getting the virtual agent to do something with that knowledge, not being more than just an FAQ. But equally, can I go and index external knowledge sources? How do I make the virtual agent aware of the fact that there are other knowledge sources out there? And really, I just need to direct someone to, let's say, the Microsoft website if they want to understand something about Office 365, rather than going and spending a whole lot of money on duplicating that same knowledge into the virtual agent. In the interest of time, I'll skip down to that last point just before we go on to the next slide. The building an ecosystem. So what we talk about, or what I talk about with customers, is actually what we're seeing increasingly is everyone's got a virtual agent. So now my challenge is at the same time as trying to adopt and get to grips with this new technology, we're also having the problem now of the fact that there are many virtual agents out there in our industry. So where a customer of ours might multi-source, so we might be taking services from Fujitsu, but let's say also services from Accenture, I don't know. And potentially Accenture has, or Atos have, their own virtual agent. So now, but that virtual agent is trained with knowledge in a particular domain. So we have virtual agents now with domain knowledge. Maybe one understands networks, the other one understands workplace. But inevitably, you're going to have a requirement that says, actually, from a user point of view, I only want to interact with one. I don't want to have to make a decision, which virtual agent do I go and talk to? So now I've got an ecosystem where I have to understand how to interact, a bit like we do with humans. You know, some people have certain skill sets, and I'm going to go and ask that person to help me with a problem that I've got. Actually, now what I'm saying is I'm going to talk to my one virtual agent, and that virtual agent is going to have to understand how to go and ask another virtual agent for help with a particular issue or for some knowledge. So sorry, if you skip on to the next slide, I'll stop talking about challenges. Really what this slide is trying to say is that we're on an evolution, and I think we've got quite a way to go as an industry. Where we have come from within Fujitsu is very much focused on selecting a virtual agent that was going to deliver the optimal customer experience, the right answer at the right time, rather than, you know, we've all heard some of the challenges that AI is having and machine learning is having in the market around applying algorithms and getting a machine to make a guess at what the answer is. So we're there, we have the ability, and we do integrate with machine learning, but we equally have virtual agents who are curated and able to give a definitive answer. So that's where we're in this sliding scale. I'm saying we're beyond reactive and proactive. We're moving into predictive, but as the AI technology starts to improve, we will improve our level of automation. We'll put more emphasis on actually having artificial intelligence potentially even get to the point where it's training the virtual agent for us. We have very small lab sort of experiments where we've actually tried that. There's considerable expense in actually feeding enough knowledge into a machine learning platform to actually get it to do that. As you see, the only other thing I'd talk about quickly on this slide is that we still have a movement from people interacting with traditional service desk channels. We're continuing to maintain those channels, but increase self-service as we go into proactive, predictive. We're now doing a lot more with the virtual agent. still got portals and various other things. We've still got all our traditional channels, although we are trying to get rid of email, doing a lot more with web chat. And then potentially in the future, we're already starting to hear noise about a zero-touch service desk and demands for zero-touch service desk. And, can we do everything online? And again, will very much depend on the industry we're trying to serve. So the last slide, I think, is the last slide. Oh no, 2 more slides. So this is a real-world example. Just briefly, this is a UK government customer. We've had the virtual agent in there running for about 2 years. So there's been quite a lot of effort to mature the knowledge base in that virtual agent. And really what we're seeing at the moment is quite a good adoption of that virtual agent. This is a very proactive, forward-thinking customer and has the type of culture that people actually want to go and embrace these new technologies. So what we're seeing is actually we've had a lot more traffic through the virtual agent as of January. When this was taken. So there's been a reduction into the calls coming through to the service desk, more going through the virtual agent. Of those, we're getting better at resolving those without actually spilling over to an agent. Whether they're simple FAQs, incident issues that the virtual agent is resolving through automation or some sort of request management. We're getting better at that. It's up to almost 90%. And then for the ones that we do need to spill over to a live agent, these are the channels that the users are typically then using once the virtual agent has it spilt over. Really critical for us is how do we maintain that seamless user experience? You go from a virtual agent where potentially the user doesn't even know they're talking to a robot through to escalated support, which is then a live agent, and then we keep the experience there. We record the fact that this person has talked to an agent and what they've said. That goes through to a live agent, and that agent hopefully doesn't go through the same set of questions again with that user. That's the intent. We skip through to the next slide. So I think that a lot of this would just echo again the points that Alex has already made. A lot of what we're experiencing when we go and deploy this solution is that the technology is very capable. Sure, there are limitations, there are defects and things that we're having to work through, but actually the bigger change is cultural. How do we reorganize? How do we get people to adopt virtual agent technology? How do we reorganize internally so we put more focus on content management? How do we do something as simple as understand what the processes are and agree what the processes are for resolving an incident or for fulfilling a request or for delivering some other form of knowledge? This is all very what would seem simple things, but actually get into no end of discussion around just trying to agree how we solve something, how best to solve something. You also have to dig through a lot of history in most organizations. We've always done it this way. We've done it this way because of some requirement that was forced on us in the ancient past. And actually, we've got to then pull back the layers and get back to the core requirement, how to address it. I've talked about content, resources, and information overload. There's a lot of content in organizations, and what we need to do is figure out which ones we're going to switch off or how to surface if we're going at that content, if we're going to keep that in parallel to the virtual agent. Getting that experience right so that we're not actually got a virtual agent and then a service desk running in parallel. Those things need to interact together. They need to be a simple, seamless user experience. Is really important for adoption. Security, obviously, I won't dwell on right now, but obviously, because of the types of content we're storing, needs to we need to make sure that we store that data in a secure way and we're integrating the systems in a secure way. And that's really, I think, my last slide. So on that point, I will hand back over. I think this last point, if you did want to understand anything more about what we're doing with SCC, there's a link there. From that, I'll hand back over to Jeremy.
Well, thanks very much for that, Ben. Yeah, that's a really insightful presentation. There's so many questions I've got to ask, but I'm kind of conscious that the chat window that we've got open has sort of been blowing up throughout the whole session. So there's 101 questions in there. Just a couple of real quick observations from me. I thought it was really interesting. I think it was probably the very last bullet point you had on your very last slide, which was how do you measure bots. And I think it's as an industry, we like to measure ones and noughts. We like to measure average handle time. How many calls do we do today? And actually, as Alex talked about, so much of this is about humans in emotion and empathy. And how do you measure that in the world of introducing virtual agents and chatbots? And maybe that's something that we'll talk about on another webinar. Interesting, the comment you made about booking flights and travel and stuff. And it's one of our customers is lastminute.com. And, the approach they take, it works. You're exactly right. It works very well in that type of industry because the parameters are very heavily defined. It's what day do you want to fly, what flight do you want to get, what's your budget, what time do you want to leave. It's exactly the same parameters if you went on Kayak or Skyscanner to book the flight yourself. So it's kind of quite easy. And I really liked your slide where you talked about the evolution and also the escape hatches that you have built into the process. So as the virtual agent starts to run out of runway or get into difficulty, how you start to then escalate up to a human who's got the context and can pick up the thread and continue seamlessly, hopefully without the end customer realizing that they've been handed from virtual to real life human. So with that said, there are literally like 101 questions, but I'm going to hand over to Emily, who's going to pick out some of the highlights. And just to reassure you, all of the questions, we will put them to Ben and Alex, and we will come back to you with a response. So if you've taken the time to post a question in that chat window, it will get answered. So over to you, Emily.
Okay, thank you very much. So one of the first questions is actually from Alex. They're actually quite pleased to see that you were talking about the balance between people and AI, because the nervousness as a human, the robots taking over their jobs. And the question that he had is, can you just sort of explain more about how you think the future is going to go in terms of robots and humans in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
I think that there are going to be some interesting developments, and I think it will echo all the things that have happened around automation in the past. And what we've seen as automation has come along, you tend to find that we're actually automating jobs and tasks that free up people to do more important things or different things that have a bigger impact. And I think that is something that definitely is going to happen here. The agents, for example, if we do free up agents in the contact center, you may find that those agents will be required, as Ben talked about, to do other things like curating content, because all this technology is only as good as the information it's working on. So you do need to curate that content, and typically, certainly for now, that needs human beings to do that. And I think one of the things that this is a bit of a bugbear of mine, one of the things that we saw in the Davos cartoon, that governments need to be thinking about this. I think the same progression will happen as been happening forever, but we do need governments and industry and people themselves to be continuing to focus on what skills do they need for the next generation, for the next role in anyone's career. And it's an evolution. And I think government and industry does need to be worrying about that too, as well as human beings. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. So Ben, this one's to you. Is there an element of self-learning with these virtual agents? For example, it seems like every day my son comes home from school with a new phrase, saying something different. In essence, would the virtual agent be able to identify the unknown term, but reference the way the word was used and be able to identify its meaning and usage. Oh, interesting. So, Ben, are you able to comment on that?
So the word without some form of machine learning would probably need to be defined for the virtual agent, certainly in the context that I'm talking about right now. But the context in which the word was used may actually be sufficient that we could still answer the question, and that's it. So unless the son is coming home and typing everything in text speak, and we haven't trained the virtual agent in that way to understand text speak, then it's probably going to fail. But certainly the context, if it's the odd word, we can ask the question in a number of different ways, but the context of that question still could be understood. And then over time, we would probably improve the dictionary or knowledge base of the virtual agent to understand slang terms, acronyms, those sort of things.
Fantastic, thanks, Ben. I think that it's quite as the world is changing with all these new words coming in and all self-learning, it's quite an interesting topic. One of the last questions, we do have quite a few more, but I'm just conscious of the time, is actually around right back at the beginning. We were talking about different channels, and web chat wasn't really mentioned as very high. One of the questions is how can we leverage and turn that around with web chat into the chatbot and AI technologies? So using sort of web chat and making sure that we can drive that to our customers to use.
Yeah, I probably should apologise. I don't use that particular slide. I haven't kept updated. It's probably a bit outdated now. Web chat is I just use it for the effect, and web chat is growing very heavily. And actually, web chat is very, if you think about it, it's pretty much text driven. It ties in very well with the concept of the virtual agent or the chatbot. It ties in very well with that. Coming in, doesn't matter how the chat's coming in, be it pure web chat or coming in over social media or SMS, doesn't really matter. That can be filtered, it can be understood, and then the virtual agent can actually then go and handle that. And as Ben also talked about with their social contact center, the important thing is, as the dialogue is going on between the person and the virtual agent, it is important to capture that information so that when it comes to a sticky point, it can be handed off to a human with the full context of that chat. That's really important. I think, Ben, you've probably got some insights that can add further to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we use heavily the in-house web chat features, no doubt, while I'm talking to you today. But so we have a solution called integrated chat, which is effectively that blending between the virtual agent with the web chat. So so initially it's the same window. We're not handing off the user at any point to say, actually, the virtual agent can't help you now, kick off a web chat. Same UI, the user goes through and talks to the virtual agent, and at some point may be escalated to a web chat if the virtual agent is unable to answer the question. But that's absolutely key for us, because otherwise you end up with an experience that's not quite is not quite as seamless.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben and Alex, for your thoughts on that. So unfortunately, we have to close there. We've run over time. Of course, this has been recorded. All of the slides will be available afterwards, and we also have resources that will be sent to you. We've got a white paper, an infographic, and a video coming shortly that goes through Enghouse's approach to chatbots and AI and how we approach that with our technology. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Ben. Thank you very much for joining us today, to Alex and to Jeremy for hosting, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.